Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Ping-Hsuan. Today I'll be talking about the anti-same-sex marriage movement in Taiwan. I'm arguing that first, the movement is a populist one to show how oppression against sexual minorities can take on different forms and even interfere with policy making. And second, anti-gender/sexuality conservatism is constantly evolving. And in this case, it's finding a legal footing for legitimacy. Before Taiwan legalized same-sex marriage in 2019, the anti-same-sex marriage and anti-sex education movements reached a new height in the 2018 referendum. And Facebook, the most widely used social media platform here, became the site of public contestation. That's why I decided to venture into the comment sections. That being the topics and data for analysis, here are the two main points in this study. First, populism and the oppression of sexual citizenship, such as same-sex marriage and gender equity education. The term populism has been thrown around for quite some time, even in Taiwan, and has been said to become an epithet that serves more to stigmatize than to analyze. However, I'd like to point out that it is important to acknowledge its analytical value in order to deepen our understanding of democracy, especially with anti-same-sex marriage movements around the world increasingly showing a populist leaning. Second, a theoretical framework for qualitative analysis of online comments. Comments are not users' passive responses to an event, but active negotiation of what is happening. Here's a quote that I keep using. It is a foundation of how I conceptualize Facebook interaction. Written language constitutes the primary resource for creating social reality in text-based computer-mediated communication. And this quote really highlights the importance of studying and engaging in online textual interaction. What is populism? You may have seen politicians being labeled as populist in the media, but are they really? Even within research in populism, there have been several definitions. Here I present the concept that I incorporate into discourse analysis. Populism entails three core elements: the people who are morally pure, the elite who are corrupt, and an antagonistic representation between them. First, the people is a construction, or an empty signifier, because, according to Laclau, it is retroactively defined by who the enemy is. It is not an actual or realistic representation of the citizens. Then we have the elite, which can be political, economic, or cultural groups that disregard or work against the will of the people. Finally, populists thrive on this antagonistic relationship and claim that only they can represent the people. This might appear democratic, and to some extent, some scholars do think that populism is a corrective to authoritarian regimes. But let's not forget that democracy relies not just on the representation of a symbolic construction of the real people, but also proper functioning of institutions to ensure that people's rights are protected by the rule of law. Populism can be dangerous for its call to bypass these democratic procedures. When we think of populism, we usually associate it with the media portrayal of right-wing movements, but it can take on a wide range of forms because it is a thin center ideology that needs to be combined with other host ideologies. For example, when attached to socialism, left-wing populism criticizes socioeconomic inequality, whereas when connected to nativism, right-wing populism supports anti-immigrant policies. What the different iterations have in common is alleging an absolute representation of the imagined people, which can imperil the representative and constitutional foundation of liberal democracy. At the bottom, we can see that the reason why I argue that the movement in this study is an example of homophobic populism. Now I'm presenting an integrated framework that combines stance taking and frame theory. A stance is a display of a socially recognized point of view or attitude. Within the discourse analytic approach, a stance is not treated as a psychological state. Rather than something in our heads, it's dialogic, to be observed in interaction. The lexical choice and intonation can all be an act of stance taking. Building on the dialogic and intersubjective aspect of stance taking, here's Du Bois' model of the stance triangle. A stance taker, subject 1, evaluates the stance object, positions the subject, which is the self, and aligns with another stance taker, subject 2, either convergently or divergently. When we take a stance toward a certain topic, the present stance can be linked to the stance that comes before as well as to the stance that follows. This results in stance accretion, where stances accumulate to form a larger network of meanings. And it is with this concept that I extend the model of stance triangle and combine it with frame theory. According to Goffman, a frame is the definition of the situation. That is, how participants would define and understand the event. This understanding is based on participant alignment, the relationship between them. Goffman called this footing. Tannen and Wallet incorporate this concept into interactional social linguistics to describe what is going on in interaction, to examine how participants negotiate meaning and relationships based on their knowledge of the topic. For example, right now with me holding the floor, we establish a speaker-listener alignment that fosters a presentation frame. When interaction changes, we could be engaging in, say, a conversation or even a Q&A frame. So as you can see, the alignment dimension is crucial in how we understand and interpret everyday events. When the act of stance taking shifts the way we align with one another, it likewise changes the way we define the situation. A new frame may arise, or even two different frames can compete. So back to the stance triangle, which is the upper half of this diagram. Below we see that matching evaluation and positionings from similar stances result in convergent alignments that uniformly define a situation. Conversely, opposing stances from counter positions lead to divergent alignments that divide participants into two different teams, each fostering a competing frame. Now a little background information on the data. The Civil Code of Taiwan stipulated that marriage be an agreement made between the male and the female parties. After 30 years of endeavor, a petition was filed in 2015 for constitutional interpretation. In 2017, a constitutional court was held, and the Grand Justices ruled that the Civil Code was unconstitutional and that same-sex marriage should be allowed. A major anti-gay organization in Taiwan, Coalition for the Happiness of Our Next Generation, or CHONG, promptly launched campaigns against it. They proposed an anti-same-sex marriage referendum in 2018. In November, the results came out as a victory for CHONG and a defeat for the pro-same-sex marriage camp. However, on May 17, 2019, the DPP administration adopted the mutatis mutandis approach, which means instead of creating new laws, existing ones from the Civil Code were adopted. When the Executive Yuan's same-sex marriage bill was passed in the Legislative Yuan, Chung continued to provoke the populist sentiments by citing the referendum results and criticizing the DPP's decision to legalize same-sex marriage. Similar civic initiatives have been taken worldwide, including Slovakia and Croatia. The referendum is a common theme in the discussion of populism, especially after Brexit in 2016, because it fits into the populist view that it is an unmediated expression of the will of the people. However, populists, who are anti-institutionalist, request for referendums not to start an open-ended deliberation among actual citizens, but to ratify and justify their own cause. But anti-same-sex marriage popular votes are not populist by default. Related movements become populist only when referendum outcomes are equated with the will of the people and leveraged against the government to hijack policymaking. To illustrate how the referendum in Taiwan was exploited to a populist end, I analyze posts and comments on Chong's Facebook page from 2017 pre-referendum to 2019 post-referendum. In this presentation, I used two excerpts as examples, one from 2017 and the other from 2019. In this post, Chong describes the Constitutional Court as an establishment that ignores the people whose voice is silenced in the same-sex marriage debate. The idiom "one voice tall" 一言堂 refers to the dictatorial style of decision-making, which echoes Chang's anti-institutionalist stance. In modern democracies, constitutional courts are designed to protect basic political rights and preserve pluralism in politics and society. But Chang's evaluation positions it in opposition to the people. While the grand justices are dubbed the judicial elites, the people is positioned through victimization. In the visual representation, the NGO representative, while dressed in white, has a rainbow symbol on one sleeve, implying support for gay rights. Across the table is the Grand Justice, with the government representative seated in the middle. Their outfits not only highlight their respective roles, but distinguish them from the outsider in plain clothes, who are meant to personify ordinary citizens. With this post, Chang suggests that grand justices and the government are colluding with gay rights activists behind closed door or in this drawing in a glass jar. Here are two comments in reply to this post. Ling questions the ruling and warns of the threat to the country. Evaluating against same-sex marriage, Ling is self-positioned as a concerned citizen, masking the homophobic stance with the nationalist discourse that portrays opposition to same-sex marriage. Replying to Ling's comment, Kuhn clarifies that the Constitutional Court is the due process at the highest level, especially for the petitioner, rather than a public hearing, whose legal nature involves direct citizens' participation at a local level. Kuhn's evaluation acknowledges the legitimacy of the Constitutional Court, positioning away from the anti-same-sex marriage stand and disaligning with Chang. The stance taken in a commenter interaction can be illustrated using the integrated framework. Same-sex marriage is treated as the stance object by which Chang aligned divergently with the Constitutional Court. When Ling takes a similar stance against the same-sex marriage issue, the convergent alignment between them fosters a frame in which the ruling is interpreted as a hasty, elitist decision that excludes the general public. On the contrary, Kuhn's approval establishes a convergent alignment with the Constitutional Court, creating a frame in which the ruling is a proper democratic procedure. The divergent alignment widens the chasm between the two teams. This echoes the increasing bipolar views regarding same-sex marriage issue as observed in the past studies. In the second excerpt, we'll see that instead of alluding to the family values, Chang underpinned its anti-same-sex marriage movement with the populist framework, in which they defended the referendum results as the legal principle to deter same-sex marriage legislation. Hence, the government was blamed for dereliction of fulfilling the will of the people when same-sex marriage was legalized, contra Chang's demand. In this post, we can see that Chang views the referendum results as the essence of democracy and used that to attack the ruling party, DPP. Therefore, their populist formation took on a partisan character. This positioning became recurrent and invited commenters to align convergently, thus framing the same-sex marriage issue as a legal conundrum and the governmental procedure as failing the people. This is the second part of the post where Chang goes deeper into the discussion of how they believe the referendum should work. Chang's homophobic populism can also be observed in a change in comment composition. The percentage of gay rights-related comments declined while that of government-related disputes rose, followed by attacks on the DPP. The opposition to same-sex couple sexual citizenship is built less on the moral ground than on the legal one. Chang's populist mobilization conceals its homophobia with an illusion about policy by the people, which confuses democracy, institutionalized debates under the rule of law, with a populist regime, direct mandates from the people. The referendum then allows unchecked majoritarianism to oppress sexual minorities. Again, we see comments in reply to this post. Xiao and Hui's comments illustrate Chang's legal framing of same-sex marriage. Between them is a convergent alignment when they make Again, with the issue of legalizing same-sex marriage being the stance object, the commenters respond to Chang's stance and make different alignments. This created two competing teams in the comments, each fostering a frame for different ways of interpreting the government's decision to legalize same-sex marriage. To conclude, the analysis illustrates how populism as a thin-center ideology is substantiated by homophobia to attack the authority in democratic guise. Using the integrated framework in discourse analysis, this study teases out how the emerging legal political framing transpires through collective stance taking in Facebook comments. Also, commenting is a way of continuous engagement with the populist. It can be seen that, while the referendum is used to perpetuate conflict, pro same sex marriage commenters can reaffirm the constitutionalism in democracy. After all, in Rousseau's general will, voters should not be thinking about their own interest, but about the common good, to avoid a majority rule to circumvent minority rights. By presenting Taiwan's case on homophobic populism, this study highlights the importance of analyzing homophobic populism and shows that it has a polarizing effect. Still, this effect can be contained with online commenting that reframes the issue not through more antagonism but through more meaningful alignment. Thank you.